Yeah, it's a hard pivot, and I don't want to throw. I feel like we're throwing a lot at you. We're doing announcements. We're doing that, but I at least want to keep rolling a little bit on our sermon series. I think it's a sermon series. It's called Money Talks, and so the idea we're talking about finances, but ultimately, what are we talking about? And I think this is applicable to even now. Ultimately, we're talking about what does it look like to lay all of my life down to the lordship of Jesus. That's in essence what we're using it. We're looking at finances as we do so, but the bigger takeaway is what is it? When I give my life to Jesus, when I say yes to Jesus, He wants it all. He wants it all. Your Sundays, your spiritual life, your work life, your marriage, your finances, your politics. He wants it all. He is Lord. He is meant to be Lord. And to the degree that we make Him Lord over those areas of our lives, I believe is the degree to which we see a life that is fruitful, a life that goes the way God would intend it to be. We put less hiccups in our way and less stumbling blocks in our way. And so that is my desire through this series. Okay, we're talking specifically about finances, but we can apply this to anything. What does it look like to put Jesus as king over my finances? How do I think of it? We've said it's a light, it's not a heavy-handed look at it. We're not like, hey, this is what we want you to do. Really what I'm just trying to do is get you to think about your finances in different ways. How do I think of them in a way that maybe increasingly trusts God with them? Oh, you were just too cute. So that's what we're looking at. And today, the message today is called Fearless Stewardship. So there's going to kind of be two parts to this: fearless stewardship. Now, the idea of stewardship is this, and so I always like this analogy. I think it works. We've been renting cars a lot. I feel like we've been going down south to visit my daughter at college and drop her off and pick her up and drive my son down. We've been down south, I feel like, more in the last year than we have ever been in our lives. And so when we go down, we rent a car. I get a really good discount from Verizon as a retiree, so it's just easier to put miles on our own car. We rent a car. When I rent a car, there's just something about knowing that it's not mine and that I have to return at the end of the trip that keeps me like almost accountable. Like I can't make a mess of this thing. I can't, if it's my car, you drink a bottle of water, you toss it in the back seat, you don't care. You run it till there's no gas in it. I don't know. That's just the way I am. It's my car. I'll do that later, kind of thing, right? But when it's somebody else's, when I know I have to bring it back to Enterprise afterward, there's just something about that helps me to look at that car different, to treat that car different. That's a little bit of the idea. We're going to get into this more and more, the idea of stewardship. That jive with you guys, right? Does that work? I don't know. I mean, because you could also have the flip. I'm thinking, it's like, that's not my car. Who cares? I'll spin the tires every time I leave, and I'll just gun it. But I think if we're really thinking, we probably want to take care of it a little better. And so what we're going to look at today really is just two thoughts. Is number one, how do we view our finances? And notice I said our finances. How do we view our stuff, our resources? And how do we view God? Those are the two questions that are going to frame our conversation. How do we view our stuff, our finances, and how do we view God? We're going to take this from Matthew chapter 25. And so chapter 25, in each of these weeks, of course, we've been doing parables. We've been allowing the parables of Jesus to kind of navigate us through our conversation. So Matthew 25 has 3 parables in it. If you're familiar with it, 3 parables really with one meaning. And the one meaning is like, be ready. So Matthew 24, if you go to Matthew 24, just the context, Jesus is talking about, he foretells the destruction of the temple, the signs of the end of the age. Jesus is like little apocalyptic. He's talking about the end, when God is going to return. And so they're like, hey, Jesus, when is it going to happen? Tell us, when is this going to happen? And he says in, Matthew 24:36, but concerning that day and hour, nobody knows, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father only, right? And so this is kind of the tension of these 3 parables. Jesus is returning. God will return. God will usher in His kingdom into this world. We just don't know when it's going to happen, right? And so, be ready. Be ready. That's his. And he's going to give you 3 parables of kind of what it looks like to be ready. And the first one is the parable of the 10 virgins who are waiting for the groom to come, and they all had lamps, and some didn't have enough oil in their lamps. They weren't prepared. So when they hear the groom is coming, they had to run out to get oil, and they missed him when he came. Be ready. Have oil in your lamp, he's saying. There's the parable of the talents, which we'll go through today. And then there's also the parable of the sheep and the goats. When he returns, right, there will be some on his right and some on his left. Or what does it look like to be good stewards and good followers? So that's kind of the context of what we're looking at. There's three parables, really one meaning. And this morning, as I said, we're going to look at the parable of the talents. If you remember the first week, we did the prodigal son. That was the parable. If you were here 2 weeks ago, and if you're not, you can go back and look at our app, and our YouTube page has our past sermons. But the first week we looked at the parable of the prodigal son, which really was a look at who God is. In essence, that's like, hey, what kind of father is God? And if you remember, we talked about that God is a God who doesn't deal in guilt, doesn't deal in shame. As we think about taking our money and like saying, Lord, help me to manage this well. He doesn't deal in guilt and shame. You've messed up. How could you? You've wrecked your life. You've made terrible financial decisions. God is a God of mercy and grace. So that first parable we looked at kind of looks at our view of who God is. This week we want to look at what the servants, or how we see God. So the first one is, who is God? This one is, how do we see God, as we look at the parable of the talents, in essence, what we want to look at. And so how we handle our finances and manage our resources is often a reflection of how we view God. And actually, I would say how we live our lives in general is a reflection of how we see God. If we see God as kind and caring and trustworthy, to that extent we will trust him with the things of our lives. If we see God as judgmental and mean and just waiting to punish you, that's to the extent that we step away from him. So how we view God makes a big difference in how we live. And again, if we look at this financially, it makes a big difference of how we present our finances to him. What am I looking for, by the way, as we go through this series? I just want us to, so often we look at our finances separate from our faith. I mean, I think we do. I've done it for a lot of my life. I got my religious life. I got my life of faith, and I've said it again and again, my finances. I got mine, my paycheck, my wallet, my money, my stuff, my finances. And so we tend to do this. I'm really just trying to encourage us to say, like, okay, Lord, how do I take this stuff that you've, as we'll talk about today, entrusted with me, and just say, look, how would you have me live this out? How would you have me spend? Where would you have me invest? How do you call me to live with this stuff that you've given me? That's what I want us to do as we go through this series. And so as we begin this parable, let's see, it starts in chapter 24, and it's going to start 25. And it's going to start at verse 14. And so it starts this way. Jesus says, "For it will be like," so, and also, I think, what is he saying? In that day, when God returns, he says, the kingdom of heaven will be like. Verse 25, verse 1, the kingdom of heaven will be like. Right, so what is the kingdom of heaven going to be like? He goes, "For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property." It's like a man who was going on a journey, who entrusted to his servants his property. Let's see, to one it says he gave 5 talents. Talents is it's a weight, right? It's a weight of gold, which, by the way, I did the math, it's a ridiculous amount. So talent is literally, it's a weight. And so he gave them gold. And apparently, Robert told me that this was off even, but most scholars place 1 talent is about 75 pounds. 75 pounds is about a little over 1,000 troy ounces of gold. Gold was trading, although this is way off, I heard, almost $2,500 per ounce. And so 1 biblical talent of gold, what I have here was $2.7 million today. Apparently it's even more than that. So the idea is that, and what is Jesus trying to say? He's like, listen, the master is generous. The master, he's not, so it's like he's generous of what he gives to his servants. And so it says anyway, so it says he gives to one, he gives 5 talents, to another he gives 2, to another 1, each according to his ability. Then he went away, right? And so as well, all these parables, who is Jesus talking about? He's talking about the kingdom of God and what God is like. And so immediately he says that God is like this master who gives his servants things to manage. And I love where it says he gave them servants and entrusted them his property. So as we look at the money that we have, the finances that we have, the resources that we have, what I want to start doing is changing our perspective on it is We say it's ours, it's ours, it's ours. Really, as Jesus teaches this parable, well, whose is it? It's God's. That everything you have is God's. We could go your health, right? The health that you have, the ability to work, the job that you have, the relationships that you have. It all comes from God. All of it comes from God. And so as we look at our finances, I think this is a really helpful perspective that I think we need to start thinking through. It's all God's. Every little bit I have. If I have a lot, if I've got a little, it all ultimately belongs to Him. So the first question, is like, how do we view our resources? Is it ours or is it God's? Because if it's ours, if we continue to just simply look at our resources, it's our stuff, we build our own kingdoms, we do simply what makes us happy, what makes us rich, which makes us and I don't think God's opposed to those things, we'll talk about that, but we just start thinking it's ours to manage. As we think about tithing, we think, well, I'll give God a little bit of it. I'll give God 10% of it. Where the idea, the right perspective really is, it's all God's. Lord, how do I manage what you have given me? I think, again, tithing even fits into that. It's like, I'm not just giving you 10% of what's mine. I'm just giving you the first fruits of what's already yours, right? That's actually I think, a healthy way to look at tithing. But it's a perspective change. And to the extent that we see our finances and our resources as God's, I think changes to the extent to how we live it and present it before Him. I love and I have here too, I don't have a lot. Oh Lord, what do I don't have. I love the idea that He's given these guys each differing amounts. It's not about how much you have. It's about your heart posture, I think, of how you use what you do have. But I think that's what He's trying to get in this parable as well. It's not that, hey, that guy had 5, I couldn't do as much as him, I only had 1. It was not so much what they did with the finances, I think it was their heart attitude for them. And so so it's not about how much you have, it's our heart value towards it. Let's see. I'm all over with my notes here, so I just want to make sure I get back on track, I guess we can go on. Verse 16, right? And so he says, he who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had, verse 17, the 2 talents made 2 talents more. And so you see the first 2 servants, what do they immediately do? They take what God has entrusted to them and they invest it, right? They use it in such a way that it benefits their master, right? Immediately. They just go to it, right? They just go. And so, but there's always big buts in the Bible, right? Usually it's but Jesus. But here's a but. Here's the wrong but. So the 2 guys at once go and take what was entrusted to them and use it in a way that benefits the master. And then in verse 18 it says, but he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. He buried it, right? He didn't use it very, very well. And so verse 19, it says he comes back. So now after a long time, the master of those servants, right? There's going to come a day when God comes back, when Jesus returns, right? He says, now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you have delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. As master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. Where there's a verse that we talk about a lot. Well done, good and faithful servant. Interesting that actually the context is how he managed resources. Well done, good and faithful servant. I lost it. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. I love he just said, I just picked up on that. He says, you've been faithful over little. We just talked about actually how much he entrusted to him, how much money that was. Right? Does that give you a hint of what God is going to entrust us with, right, when we get into His kingdom? If a couple of $1 billion times 5 is a little, imagine what God is going to entrust to us, right, in His kingdom. That's huge. That's amazing. I just jumped out at me there. And then the other guy says, hey, you've given me 2. Let's see. Well done. Verse 22, and he who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I've made 2 more talents more. Right? And he says to him as well, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Who's the good servant? the ones who took what God had entrusted to them, what the master had entrusted to them, and used them for the benefit of the master. And actually, what does it say? When they lived out their finances in a way that benefited the master, what does God do? He benefits them, right? They act I think there's a principle here, right? When we do finances God's way, it's not restrictive. It doesn't mean that you can't build wealth for yourself. It doesn't mean that you can't be well off. But when we put God first, when we do it His way, He entrusts us with more and much. This is not it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. I don't think that's the biblical principle here. Like, you do this stuff so that God will, it's a great ROI on your investment. But I think there is a principle here. As we trust God with our finances, right? When we do it His way, we find that He blesses our finances. Just like when we do marriage God's way, He blesses your marriage. Just like anything we place under the Lord's lordship, when we do it His way, everything in us, everything in society, everything in culture, everything in our own heart says it's going to be restrictive if I do it God's way. The exact opposite is true, and you will find it in your finances as well. When you do it God's way, He blesses you. And so, well done, good and faithful servant. Now you get to the third guy in verse 24, right? So it says, then he also had received the 1 talent, came forward. Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. What's the next line? What does it say next? It says, so I was afraid. So I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours. And it's interesting after this, of course, I've never picked up on this until I started reading this one else this week too. It says, but the master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming would have at least given me interest. It's interesting. So the master doesn't, you notice he doesn't affirm his viewpoint. He says, I knew you to be a hard man who reaped where he didn't sow. And so the master doesn't come back and say, you know what, you're darn right I am a hard master and you didn't do it. He doesn't affirm. That is a false view of who the master was. It is a false view of who God is. He is not a hard master. He is not going to come back and blast you because you didn't do it His way. He is actually a master that can be trusted. You see, the other 2 servants, what did? They buried their fear, but they used their talents. They used what they had. This guy buried his talents and lived in fear. You see that, right? Because he had a false view of who God is. That's the other question I wanted to pose today. What is your view of God? What is your view? Is He somebody to be afraid of? Is He somebody to oh my goodness, there's no way I could present my finances or my financial situation to God because He's going to ask of me things that I couldn't possibly do? Or do you know God as one who is generous? A God who is kind and caring and loving, right? He wasn't asking a lot, by the way, from even the guy who he gave the 1 to. He goes, just if you would have just put it in the bank and got interest. He's not asking for a ton. He's just asking for your heart. He's just asking it. So it's not about, and it wasn't with the other guys. I don't think it was about, hey, you made 5 and you made 2 more. It wasn't about what they did with it, how they invested it, how much they made that made them the good servants. I believe, again, as I said earlier, it was their heart. It was their heart to simply trust, where this guy didn't. And so he's not asking for much. He's just asking for us to just trust Him in our finances, trust Him in these areas. Can we do that? I have written here too, it says, beware of decisions that come as a result of things you know about God. Beware of decisions that come from things that you think you know about God. Fear is understandable. For time, I'll go through this quick. Right? Fear in our finances is understandable, right? Number 1 stress in life, statistics say, is finances. 73% of Americans say fear. Say the number 1 stress is finances. 90% of Americans say that money is impacting their stress level to some extent. 79% of Americans find at least one financial topic intimidating. Like there's something in your life financially, your mortgage, your car pay, something that is impacting you negatively in terms of just being intimidating. So like it's understandable to be a little fearful when it comes to our finances. What God, I think, is calling us to do is just trust Him. that if we bring what we have to him, and actually the first part was that it's actually just not ours, it's his anyway, it's his already. But if we bring to him what is already his, and we just make it part of your prayer life, Lord, how would you call me to live? How would you call me to use what you have given me, right? We find, I don't want to repeat the same thing again and again, but we find that God is faithful and trustworthy and not to be feared. So when we live this way, I'll tell this story too. James Rich, I think, so last weekend, James did such a great job. James and Amberly, it was so good to have those guys here. What a beautiful family, really, really nice. I can't remember if he did this on Saturday or if he did this on Sunday when he preached, but he told the story, and this is just a little side note, but I think he was in youth group or something, and his youth leader, somebody had asked his youth leader, say, can I borrow your car? Did he tell that story here? In Saturday or whatever, he did tell us. But so the guy says, hey, can I borrow your Toyota? And the guy was like, I don't have a Toyota. What are you talking about? And he goes, well, whose car is that out there in the parking lot? And he goes, oh, that's God's. You can use it. Go ahead. And so he's like, that's not my car. Like actually, James said it changed his life. It changed his perspective on his stuff. And that guy was like, that's not my car. That's God's. He gave me that car. So of course, as long as it's free, you can use it. It's God's. Right? What if we had that kind of open hand with the things that God has entrusted to us? Because they're all his anyway. If we looked at it's not me, it's not mine. God gave me that. And so certainly I'll share. I'll be open-handed. I'll be generous, right? That's the heart I think God is looking to build in us. Oh, there are some fear scriptures. You could just throw those up too. I think at this point I'm just trying to hit a couple of things, right? So we're not called to fear, even in our finances. We're called to trust, right? Just some scriptures there you could take a peek at. What does fearless stewardship look like? I'll just paint this out. If we fast forward to Matthew 25, verse 34, this is part of the sheep and the goats. Jesus says, as he returns, and he's putting the sheep on one side and the goats on the other, right? The good and faithful servants and the wicked servants. He says in verse 34, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. The righteous will answer, Lord, when the heck did we do that? And he says, when you did, and when do we see a stranger? When do we do all this stuff? And the king will answer, truly, as verse 40, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. And so he gives us a little glimpse of actually what it looks like to live this way, to live with an open hand on our finances, is just to live in a way that sees needs and blesses it the best that we can, to recognize that it's not ours anyway and that God is at work. When we see our finances this way, we make the invisible God visible. Right? When we are generous with our time and our energy and our money, what do? We make the invisible God visible. People get to see what God is like. People get to see what God's kingdom is like when we live this way. And that is our calling as followers of Jesus. I'm going to wrap it up right here. What do you think? And I have what do you think God is like? Because you are living out of what he is like. And so as it comes to your finances, what is your perspective on God? What is your perspective on all of God's ways? Maybe we'll open it back up at the end as well. What if you were to trust God in all the areas of your life? What if you were to trust him in relationships? What if you were to trust him if actually I could forgive somebody and not have to hold stuff again? That's the hard part about forgiveness, right? When we forgive somebody, we're giving up our grounds against them. We are giving up we want to punish them when we hold unforgiveness against somebody. And when we do that, we have to trust God with it, right? And so in all the areas of your life, what would it look like to trust God because he is trustworthy? Well, if nothing else you get through today is that God is trustworthy. He is trustworthy. He is trustworthy in your finances. He is trustworthy in each and every area of your life. He's going to be trustworthy to navigate us through the times that we're in. God is good, and he has plans and purposes for this, for your life,